So you should have gotten a string when you came in to the, do you have one? Did you get a string? All right, well, mine's all knotted up already. And I'm going to invite you to put some knots into yours in a very specific way. I want to talk about those places, those times when you've been broken, when you've been hurt, when you've felt a disconnection in your life. And when I talk about something that you've experienced, I want to invite you to put a knot into your string. Now this isn't just a string of woes, okay? This is also represents the strength and the perseverance of the human spirit that got you through whatever it is that you got through, your faith and whatever it is that helped you do that. So, for example, if you've experienced death in your life, somebody who you love has died, put a knot in that string in memory of that person, and also with a sense of sorrow for that loss, because that person, those tears are a tribute to that person who's gone. I want you to think of all the ways in which your life has been broken. Maybe by addiction. Maybe yours, maybe someone else's. And it just tore apart your relationship or your family or your job. Maybe you lost a job. Even if you retired from a job, that's a break, because that's a separation, and something new needs to be tied together, woven together in your life after that. Maybe you have had a break because of religious belief with somebody in your family, somebody you work with, a neighbor. Maybe you've had a breach with God and the whole idea of a spiritual life. Put a knot for that break, for that separation, because this is about binding it back together. Now, you might not have already done it, but put the knot there as a reminder of those things. How about politics? Woo! All right. That'll do it. How about racism? How about homophobia? How about ageism and so many things sexism? Have you been wounded by those? Have you ever been hurt, disconnected? Somebody didn't listen. Maybe you're a woman. Somebody didn't listen to you because of your gender. Right? It's funny. People think that being gay is what causes the break. You hear that from pastors and you hear that from politicians. When it's not, homosexuality is not what creates the break. It's homophobia that causes the break, right? Just like in racism. People who are racist, they think that it's difference that causes the problems. If we could get everybody to just be the same and think the same and act the same, we wouldn't have any problems. It's not the difference, it's the discrimination that causes the problem. How has your life been impacted by those kinds of things? How about a kind of a prejudice that you were taught when you were young? Were you taught to hate black people? Were you taught to hate white people? Or distrust? It's funny, people say, I'm not prejudiced. I'm not prejudiced against anybody. And they say, but people always have something, but except the French. I hate the French, Like, well, what's that, right? So everyone has something and that we were taught. So put a knot for that, because that's definitely, and if you've gotten over it, wow, that's an important knot in your life. What are some of the ways that you've been, maybe a diagnosis? Maybe your body broke down in a certain way. All these things are potentially initiatory, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. All these things are potentially initiatory moments in your life to bring you closer to your own possibility, potential destiny. I want to talk about that in just a moment. What are some other ways? You can call out some ways in which people are broken in this life that I haven't named yet. Anybody? Divorce. Oh, that's one of my knots. My parents were divorced when I was young. Whether your parents got divorced, you have a broken family that way, or you were divorced yourself, that's a huge one in our world today. And what is it? Yeah, fight with a friend, a falling out with somebody who you were close to, and then boom, it's gone. How about possessions that you may have had that were irreplaceable, that maybe there was a fire, maybe you lost it, Maybe a financial problem that caused you to lose something that you care so deeply about. How about your reputation? Have you ever made a mistake that cost you your reputation or the trust of others? How about deceit, infidelity? These are all kinds of breaks and breaches in life, in our lives, but they're not the end of the story. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to tell a story. It's funny, I took the title of this from, everyone's got a knot at least now. One knot, I hope. You must have a knot at this point. If you don't have a knot, ask the person you're sitting with. They'll tell you what your problems are. And especially if you're sitting with your spouse or your significant other. We all have them. I took the title from the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, from Genesis, from the Bible. Right? You ate the apple, now what? Right now, but I want to say right out that I do not think for even a second that the problems in the world and all this stuff we're talking about is because Eve ate an apple. All right, you with me on that? Women, they always get blamed for all the problems in the world. Pandora's box, you know, she opens up the box in the Greeks and she creates all the evil in the world. Women just always get the brunt of something. And this actually is Women's History Month in the United States. I don't know if you know that. Rush Limbaugh apparently doesn't know that. There's a lot of things he doesn't know, but that just happens to be one of them. So how do we get these stories like Adam and Eve? Every culture has one, every tradition, every tribe has a story. Why do they have a story? The story is there because we need people trying to explain how is it that we got here, and then if we got here because of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowledgeable God, then how could there be all these problems? How could there be all this pain? It doesn't make sense. And so stories like this, and there's so many, that they say it was created by such a God, and it was perfect. It was paradise, and it was the humans that messed it up. Okay, that's the story. And so I want to tell a story that's a little bit different in honor of Women's History Month. I found a story that I heard from the storyteller and mythologist Michael Meade. It's a Native American story. It's a Native American story, and in this story about creation, and in this story, the woman is the heroine, is the wise one, is the good one. So how about that for Women's History? And you want to hear a story? You don't sound like you really want to hear a story. I mean, yeah. All right. What is a Native American story? So I need to get behind a drum. I need a little soundtrack for this story, if that's all right. Let's see if the drum's working. All right. Once upon a time, back before time was something that millions of Americans were doing in prisons all over this country, back before time was a sentence, when time was a rhythm of our lives, back in those times, there was a cave. The elders tell us a cave in this land. In fact, they tell us it's still there. But even though it's still there, and even though we have highways traversing and crossing all over this land, and we've got SUVs and four-wheel drives and all kinds of vehicles to go off-road, still nobody knows where it is. But the elders tell us that it's there. And in this cave, there's an old woman who is weaving the most beautiful garment in the world. In fact, at this point of the story, she's weaving the trim at the edge of the garment, almost finished. And she is making that trim really beautiful, so she's using something special. She's using porcupine quills. And in order to weave the porcupine quills into the garment, she needs to flatten the quills. And in order to flatten the quills, she's got to bite down on the quills. And she's been doing this for 100, maybe thousands of years. And so her teeth have been worn down to stubs that are barely pushing out beyond her gums. But she keeps doing it anyway. And every once in a while, this woman needs to get up and go back to the great cauldron that's also in the cave. And in that cauldron is an amazing soup that's filled with all the herbs and all the seeds and all the green and growing things on this splendid earth. And in this stew, all of nature exists, and there's a fire under the cauldron, and if she doesn't go back there every once in a while to stir this soup, it might burn, and they say there would be lots of problems in our world. Well, this time, when she gets up and she goes to stir the cauldron, she's moving really slow, being old and all, and having been sitting down for so long. She's not moving real fast, and she's not stirring real fast, and that dog, what dog? That dog that's also living in the cave with her goes and unravels the entire garment that she's been working in, every little bit, so that when she gets back to her chair, she sees threads everywhere and quills. And she sits down and she starts weaving the garment all over again with new patterns in new and beautiful and extraordinary ways. Now, there are people who say that if only we could get rid of that dog, it's that dog's fault that we have so much trouble and problems in the world. But the elders say, the elders tell us that no, if that woman ever finishes that garment, that the whole world will come to an end. And so that dog, those troubles, those breaks and tears and unravelings in our lives are necessary for the continuation and the creativity and the beauty and new patterns in this world. At least that's what the old people say. Now, they may not be right, but you know, our elders are supposed to be thinking more about the deep meaning of things. So if our elders don't know, who does? The idea here is that there are two twins in this world that keep our lives going: nature and culture. And they interact together. They're not in competition with one another, as some people say. And nature, we know nature is just full of rejuvenation, right? Forests, they don't just put up one tree. They put up hundreds, thousands of trees, right, till they're crowding each other out. When there's a forest fire, it causes incredible destruction and wreaks all kinds of havoc around the forest. But then the forest always replants and comes back to life. And they say that it has to happen. There have to be forest fires in order for the forest and the jungles and the plants of the world to continue to thrive and for new plants to be developed. And so it's really important. You might have been around when Mount St. Helens exploded. Remember that out in Washington? That was 1980. And when that volcano, it erupted, it created hundreds of miles of wasteland. And the experts said back then that this wasteland was going to be there for decades because it takes so long to rejuvenate itself. But what happened? What happened was that pretty soon, a lot sooner than anyone imagined, all of a sudden through the rock and through the ash came up these green sprouts of plants that people didn't even know existed. They weren't even there before, but somehow the heat of this experience brought them out. Nature is constantly rejuvenating itself, recreating, and we are part of nature, and we too do the same thing. Now, culture is the way that we come to make meaning of nature and of our lives and our existence, through art, through language, through science, through music, through religion, and all these ways that we make meaning. And culture is constantly renewing itself, but it's the breaks and the problems that happen that lead us to the new beginning, like in the story, that all of a sudden we start to weave new patterns after the Oklahoma City bombing, after 9/11, after a death in our lives, after our divorce, after we graduate, after that person who we loved died. We recreate our lives. We bind it back together. We tie it back together, and we become new. And if we don't, then we have a serious problem, and the world, then our world, comes to an end. So this is about initiation. This is about, as my good friend Carlton Pearson, Bishop Carlton Pearson says, when shift happens, and shift happens, now, you know what, let me spell that for you, S-H-I-F-T. When change happens in our lives, we need to respond, and it's about how we respond creatively. One, who was it, D.H. Lawrence, I believe, was the poet, who told us that it is the genius of people's lives, the thread of genius of a person's life becomes visible through creativity. The idea here is that everybody has genius in them that is trying to come out. Now, this goes against this idea in modern culture that we're born a blank slate, right? The tabula rasa, that we come into the world a blank slate. Anyone who has kids knows that they're not born a blank slate. Especially people who are identical twins, born on the same day to the same family, raised in the same house, went to the same schools, and have completely different passions and ways of being in the world and ways that their minds work. So children come into the world with a spirit. The word genius, it comes from a Latin root, but actually goes back to an African word, which means the spirit there. Meaning that every person is born with a spirit that is there inside them, and life is trying to draw that spirit out of us. And this is one of the problems we have with education today, is that we've lost the sense of what education is about. We talk about all the time in this country standardized education. Who wants a standardized child? Right? It's this idea that if it's standard, if it's standardized, if it's normal, that's a good thing. If anyone who's an artist here, if you do a painting, if you take a photograph, how would it feel if somebody comes up, that is so normal? That's not what we're looking for, right? A piece of music, it's not the normal things. It's not the standardized things. It's the unusual, the unique, the creative people and products and programs in our lives that turn us on, that set us on fire, that change the world. And so we need to remember that education is about drawing out the genius that's inside every one of those children who are here and every one of us. And one of the ways that we do that, one of the ways that life does that for us, is through the breaks and the cracks in our lives. And that's why we need to stop covering them over, trying to drink our way out of them, trying to escape them, trying to run away from them. But actually, when we cover over those cracks, we don't allow for our spirit, for our genius to come alive in the world. So here's what I want you to think about. These problems, these breaks, these breaches in our lives are a kind of initiation. I want to tell you about initiation for a second, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. You have knots in your string. Think about these for a second. The first step in initiation is some kind of ordeal, right? So in an initiation ritual, which happened all over the world, all different cultures, they create an ordeal for the initiate, some kind of trauma, some kind of pain, some kind of trial. A lot of times you'll see in some of the tribal rituals, piercing or tattooing or scarring, cutting. There's all kinds of things, or spirit quests where they go up for 3 days with just a bottle of water and they have to sit in nature all by themselves. No matter what happens, they have to stay in one spot. There's all kinds of ordeals that are created. It's a trauma, it's a trial, it's a painful thing, right? Just like any one of the knots in the string. And then the next part of initiation is separation. You're set apart. You go away from the village, away from the tribe, away from your family. So when you think about when you've gone through something, a lot of these breaks are about separation, whether it's death and somebody's separated from us in the physical life, or whether it's divorce, or whether it's any kind of separation, losing a job, addiction, which separates us from our own wholeness and our own self, losing a limb, going through surgery, whatever that is. These things create a separation. In surgery, we get put into the hospital, we get set away from our home, away from our family. And also we feel separate. If you've been through something, and I know everybody has, when you go through something, you feel like you look around and you go, gosh, the whole world seems like everyone else is having a good time. They're going through their life. How come I'm dealing with this? And so there's this sense of separation. Do you see how these events in our lives follow and parallel perfectly in initiatory ritual? Now, the third part is the key to a successful initiation. And when I mean initiation, it is something that leads us into the next stage of our development, of our truth, of our destiny, of our possibility. And the third part of every initiation is reintegration with the community, so that these initiates are brought back into the community, surrounded by the elders, the wise men and women of the village. And those people help them to make sense of what happened, to make sense of what does this mean about them? What does this mean about the world? How'd they get through it? And once they go through that part, they come away now initiated into, in many cases, the rite of passage into adulthood. Now they're an adult. They've been through it. They survived it. They have a new understanding and a new way of walking and being in the world. But every one of these knots on your string is a potential initiatory moment, and we have everyday initiatory moments all the time. I think about the time when I lost my daughter almost 6 years ago now. And it was just, I felt so separated from everybody and everything, even though you all surrounded me and this church and this city and my family. It still was like, why am I having to do this? And no one else has to do this. And I was just in pain. It was an ordeal of a lifetime. But fortunately for me, I was surrounded by incredible people who helped me to make sense of that experience so that I could come through it and be a better father and a better husband and a better minister and a better friend. That's what the possibility is of every single breach and break and problem in our lives. So I want you to think of one of the knots as you go through this week, and think of one that was really hard and ask yourself, did I fulfill that? Did I go all the way through, or did I start drinking? Did I start gambling? Did I start looking at pictures on the internet? What did I do to try to avoid dealing with the pain, going through the crack? How did I stop that initiation from happening and now go back and make it happen? Let me give you an example. Soldiers who come back from war, right? War is an initiation with these 18, 19-year-olds. Oftentimes they're going off to war. It's an ordeal, right? Big ordeal. And it is a separation from their family, from their culture, from everything they know. But when they come back, we often don't do a good job of surrounding them with wise people to help them reintegrate their lives. And so we see so many veterans of war who end up committing suicide, who end up addicted to drugs, who end up homeless. That's a failure of creativity and imagination of our own culture, and something that we as a church have to do what we can to help. But this happens all the time in our own lives. And so you might say, why do we talk about this in church? Why do we talk about this with our children? And one of the things is we want our children to know breaks are going to happen, problems are going to happen in their lives. That's not the end of life. As a matter of fact, it may be the way they find their life. Our youth, it's the same thing. They're going through all kinds of stages and transitions in their lives, in your lives, and we need to help them know that the problems that you have, the problems that you encounter, they're not keeping you from finding your purpose. They're not keeping you from finding your life. They are actually leading you into your life. So pay attention to the painful places. Don't let those experiences go unmet by your fullness. Now, the same thing happens with older people in surgery. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And sometimes people will come talk to me after a surgery, and we'll start to talk about the ways in which this is initiatory for them. And it's amazing to hear the stories about how they're going to live their life anew after a hysterectomy, after an amputation, after losing an organ, or a woman losing her breasts, or all the kinds of things that we go through surgery. This is a time to then tie back together and remake ourselves in the world. And that's why it's always a shame when you see older folks who are sitting around, together, and they've had this incredible initiatory moment in their lives, but they're just talking about the surface things. Well, I had to go into surgery. I couldn't eat for a day. I'm taking these pills. I feel awful. My gut's all bloated. All this stuff. When really, what needs to happen is for them to be surrounded by love. And this is interesting because what Michael Meade says is that cultures fray and societies fray from the ends like a rope. And so we need to pay attention to our elders, and we need to pay attention to our children. And that's what we're going to do, right? Youth Sunday, next Sunday, we're going to come out, we're going to pay attention to our youth. Find out what they're saying, find out how they're doing, be inspired by them. And then at Heritage Sunday, on the first Sunday of April, we're going to come and hear from our elders. That's what communities do, and there's so few communities left in the world, in America anymore, but we've got one right here. It's intergenerational, it's interesting, it's multicultural, it's got lots of different religious perspectives and beliefs, and we have a real, thriving, healthy community that cares about making a difference in the world outside of its own walls, with great music and great people. So we need to care for it and tend it and hold it together through anything and any trials and any breaks and any breaches that might come. I just want to say lastly about dying, because some people, they think that, well, if I'm dying, how could I be going through an initiation? The doctor says I only have 3 months or 3 weeks to live. I can't be initiated into something else except for death. But I want to say something here that's very important to remember, is that once we get past the point where we can no longer be cured, there's still a lot of healing that can happen in our lives. There's conversations that we can have with our children, with our neighbors, with our loved ones, the love that was never expressed, the secrets that were never told, the stories that were truncated and not made real. We have an opportunity at the end of our lives to bless the people around us by giving them that kind of truth and that kind of honesty. So every stage, every breach, every difference, every difficulty that we experience has the potential to draw out the spirit and the genius inside of you, and it's meant to do it. So pay attention to the breaches and pay attention to the breaks, because that's where the love and that's where the light comes through. I love you. Amen.